Today, Ruby, Gabs, and I discuss what special considerations need to be taken into account as camps look at restarting operations in 2021. Though you may be used to pulling out the open camp checklist at the beginning of the season, this year things will look a little differently, especially for camps that opted to not run their typical programming in 2020. Some of you may even have been furloughed from your positions and find yourselves having to restart and rebuild staffing conversations started months ago. Join us for our conversation about how to train staff after a gap in operation.
Welcome to Camp Code, a podcast brought to you by GoCampPro. We have created and are dedicated to this podcast because we believe that staff training is one of, if not the most important part of your job as a camp director. Staff training is what prepares your staff to care for their campers, to feel confident in their skills, to do their jobs to the best of their ability, and to learn along the way. A well thought out and intentional staff training will help you in more ways than you can imagine. We need to help each other bring our very best. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited you're listening to this episode. I believe this one will be released as one of our first ones in 2021. So welcome to the new year. We're recording this just before the new year in December. And I want to introduce our co-host before we get going with our topic today. So Beth, will you start us off today?
Absolutely. I'm Beth Allison. I'm co-owner of Camp Hacker and GoCampPro. I was a camp director for many, many years in Muskoka, Ontario, Canada, but I'm now a camp consultant and my focus is intentional leadership training.
Gabrielle.
And my name is Gabrielle Rail. I'm one of the camp directors of Camp Waro, and Camp Waro is an all-girls camp in the Laurentian Mountains of Quebec, Canada, and we focus on creating a positive female community, and we do that while speaking in French and in English. And I am also curious about what 2021 is. How is it over there? Is it good? Is it better than where we are right now? I hope so.
Don't we all hope so? Oh my goodness. And I'm Ruby Compton. I'm the Chief Exploration Officer for Ruby Outdoors, and I live and work primarily in Western North Carolina in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Today, recording from my parents' house in Nashville, Tennessee, and my internet is weak, so that's why if you're watching the video, my video is not on today. We are so excited to be jumping into the new year and know that once we get past January 1st, people start planning for training. So today we are talking about the silent summer and training after a gap in operation. And I know for most camps, we all take some sort of gap in operation often, right? But it's usually only about 9 months, 8, 9 months, maybe even less. But this year, some of us are facing 24 months of a gap in operation. And so we thought there may be some things that we need to do specifically this year as we train our staff now that we've spent a little time apart. So Beth, what comes to mind for you for special considerations for this situation?
Well, as you've already alluded to, Ruby, as we are recording this podcast, we have 2 days left of 2020, a year that brought us great sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, and a year in which many of us didn't run camp, didn't hire staff, didn't get to spend that remarkable time with people who mean so much to us. It was a year that brought significant financial struggles, furloughs, and loss, and a year which will not see the end of the struggles. So there's more of this around the corner as we head into 2021, but hopefully a whole lot less. But as this year draws to a close, I think it's the natural time to reflect, to take stock, to renew our purpose and set some goals. So I really encourage all of you to take the time now to do your homework, your research, to have the conversations, to do some planning with your people, to prepare for staff training like you never have before, whether or not you were able to run this past summer. I think that we need to approach staff training this year with a different lens, one which focuses more on the mental and emotional health of our staff and the rebuilding of community. We've spent so much of this year in isolation, in virtual experiences, in solitude, having lost many of the opportunities to gather that we just always took for granted. And we just can't know how all of this has affected our people, has changed them. We may not know all that they've been through or how difficult their time has been. We may not realize how they've grown or matured or what new skills they've acquired. So I think we need to take the time to find out, to get reacquainted with our people, to help them rediscover their joy for camp and for their time with one another, and set in motion a new and different era of training. I think this year we need to, more than ever before, lead with empathy and humanity. We have a role, we've always had this role that goes beyond being just an employer. And under the circumstances, I think this is more important than ever before. Camps are communities built around relationships between people across the organization. And these days, staff face fear and uncertainty at levels, along with ourselves, that we just haven't experienced before. So I think it's crucial for directors to dedicate time to understand how their people are coping, to show empathy and support their teams where they're needed. So what I would suggest is to sit down right now and make a plan, if you haven't already started, and create 2 lists. So ask yourself what your people will need from you this season and what they will want from you. You can ask your leadership team for their ideas, or members of your staff from 2020, or those who would have been your staff in 2020, and just start compiling. What do they need this year and what do they want? And I would imagine staff will need things like knowing what's new with policies and protocols around PPE and COVID-19 safety. They will need to know why you have changed the things that you have. What's the thinking and the science and the logic behind it all? So don't miss this step. This is a camp code staple. Always explain your why. They will need training on all that's new with COVID policies so that they can feel really confident in their responsibilities. And so they feel comfortable enough to still enjoy what camp has to offer. So they're going to need to practice with PPE, with new protocols, and they'll need to do this a lot. So I think we really need to build that into training time. They'll need to feel safe and to know that you have thought of every detail to keep them healthy, as well as the campers, because COVID-19 isn't just going to disappear and be gone by the time summer shows up. So share your thinking and your planning as 2020 begins. And we've done a whole podcast about that. So go back and take a look there, but start sending out info now about how camp may look this year, and front load that this will likely change as the year progresses, and that being flexible is going to be key. They need to feel comfortable with one another again. So they're going to need to rebuild community. Even if you've been great about keeping people in contact with one another virtually, you'll need to spend a lot of time community building and creating connections this year. And I mean a lot. They'll want things like to feel like they're home again. They'll want to reminisce and have camp be all the things that they've been missing. And this could be really hard because of new policies and changes that are required. They're going to want to spend time together as a staff, hanging out, reconnecting. So you need to build that into your training too. It just can't be enough time to do all the skills that they're going to need to be good and effective staff members. And finally, they're going to want to know that they're making a difference, that leaving their homes to come to camp for the entire summer or 5 days a week for the entire summer will be worth it, that they're part of something extraordinary, and that working with you, they can make a positive difference to help the world get back on track and headed in direction that they'll be proud of and eager to participate in. So these are just like a few examples of what should be on your list, but it's a start. So take the time now to think, to read, to ask the questions, to listen, and then plan accordingly what your people need and what they want. And then I think finally on this point, you need to be open to change. You may need more days of training this year. You may need some virtual training ahead of arriving at camp. And we've all had a lot of practice and we're getting much better at virtual experiences. You may need to throw out the old schedule of this is how we've done training for years and start fresh. But I think that it's the perfect time to shake things up. So don't be afraid to try some things that are completely different from what you've done in the past, coupled, of course, with those beloved rituals and community times that they have been longing for and have likely missed so much. So do your homework, make 2 lists, their needs and their wants, and then create your plan, not allowing yourself to be bound by what you've done before.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks for kicking us off, Beth. Gabrielle, what would you add?
I like what you're saying, Beth. And for me, what it boils down to is gathering information, taking the pulse. And when you do that with your staff members, you're inevitably informing them already in the direction of what the summer is going to look like. It's about touching base. It's about connecting with each other. It's about saying that you're there to listen and that you have a plan. And part of the plan is connecting with them. And so for me, I love that. And one of the things I would add on is to evaluate what firsts would staff members would have missed depending on the stage of where they were at in their camp career. So if it was going to be their first year as a staff member, what kind of support are they going to need coming in? Because technically they would have been your second year. So what are those firsts, as well as what are the lasts? So if you had if there's a staff member that's transitioning from staff member to leadership team and they didn't get to go on that senior trip, or these different they would have been part of the play but now they're doing something else, evaluate those firsts and lasts and see can you incorporate some of these firsts and lasts and make it transparent during staff training. Do that overnight, or do that crazy packing everything and getting down to to the van and saying, okay, we're going for a trip to get ice cream instead of going canoeing. But celebrate these firsts and lasts that staff members didn't have an opportunity to do, and honor the fact that those firsts build confidence, and they don't have necessarily that, and we're going to be putting them in positions where they haven't created that baseline. So just acknowledging it and maybe even celebrating first and last, I think is really, really helpful. I think also looking at, sometimes we look at our camp and we want to always be innovative, and what's our new programs, and how do we want to build on past summers. I think this summer is an okay summer to bring back your best hits, your best sessions, your best programs, your best songs. Bring back and celebrate all the things that you have done. If there's something that you try to keep for a couple of years and then bring it back, do all of your hits this summer, so that you're creating a space of familiarity. You're creating something that our staff members already know. And there's going to be so many changes anyways, saying be transparent that we're going to create all of our best hits as possible. And so that you're creating a space of familiarity and celebration of the community that came before you, I think can be really, really helpful. And you can pack a lot of that into staff training. So much team building can come from one of our most wonderful programs that we have done during the summer, and have that as an evening program for your staff, or a day program if you're a day camp. And lastly, I would look at your staff training on where you can create flexibility versus support. So in that flexibility piece, sometimes when things are just a little too controlled because we have to, change our procedures, just in the control that we're experiencing right now, where in certain parts of the world things are shut down, like it is in Canada at the moment. Stores are closed except for grocery stores. There's a lot of restrictions that are happening. So is there a possibility of creating sessions where, for example, if it's a wake up routine session, you have your routines of the day, maybe you have a wake up routine session, but you have 3 sessions running at the same time that focuses on a different aspect of the wake up routine. And all of them would have perhaps the basics. So every session that you go to, the basics would be covered. But for example, within our camp, as I've mentioned, it's an all girls camp. So a lot of our kids have long hair. A lot of our kids, we need to brush them, braid their hair in the morning. Maybe there's a session that's around hair care in the morning with a routine. Or maybe it's about the hyperactive group, group that's already ready and you still have 20 minutes to kill. So what do you do then? And have 3 different sessions that staff members can choose from, but they're going to get the basic information, but something that they have control and choice. And then at the same time, you can have leadership team members that are maybe young, new leadership team members doing these mini 30-minute sessions that are not too intensive. And they get to, have a smaller group and run that experiential exercise. So look at those firsts and lasts, look at maybe celebrating the best of your camp, and also seeing if there's a possibility of creating flexibility for your staff members so they can have some control over what their schedule might look like during the summer.
That's brilliant.
Brilliant.
That's all I have to say for the rest of the podcast. Are we done? Ruby.
So many good thoughts. And I have no doubt you'll have more for us as the rest of the show goes on. I want to start off with a story. And I'm actually a little bit curious for any of our listeners who heard me say that I'm at my parents' house, who were like judging me hardcore that I traveled for the holidays. And I'm not mad at you about judging, because I would judge too. And I can justify that I did a 14-day quarantine and all these things and why I'm here and whatever, but that's not what this episode is about. So recognize that people have been living in really isolated, judgy spaces. And so that's something that we're going to have to pay attention to and deal with at camp this summer. So that's the first thing, but that's not actually the point I wanted to make. I want to tell you a story about when I got home to my parents' house and was eating dinner. And I noticed the china in the china cabinet. And I said, Mom, when is the last time you got the china out? And she was like, oh, it's been years. I was like, you definitely haven't gotten it out this year, right? And she was like, yeah, no, of course not. And so we decided that at some point while I'm home that we're going to get the china out. We're going to eat off the nice china. And she was like, if you're willing to wash it, hand wash it, it can't go in the dishwasher, then we'll do it. And I was like, great. What are we going to eat off of the china? And she was like, well, I don't know. And I was like, I think we should eat hamburgers off of the china.
Yes.
And she just cringed. And I was like, it's 2020. There's no rules. All the rules have gone out of the window. And so I want to encourage you to look at your staff training and be okay with any of the things that you've assumed to be true in the past. They may not be true anymore. I recently had a great conversation. A lot of what I'm going to share today is going to be from this conversation I had with a friend of mine, Nadia, who was a camp director at a program at a facility that the ownership team had purchased, and it had sat dormant for like 5 years. So it operated as a camp for a long time. It closed down, it reopened, and it closed down again. And most recently sat with nothing going on it for about 5 years. And then new ownership came in, and she was part of the team that was working to open that camp again. And so I asked her, like, tell me about that. That's a big gap in operation. What can we learn from your experience with that applying to this year for folks who may have had a facility sitting quiet for 24 months? Interestingly, one of the most useful tips that she told me was actually with her job she's at right now. She's working as a ski instructor out west. And she said, we can't have staff meetings right now because we have staff that are coming in and out. And so we can't all have this morning huddle anymore. And so now that communication is done via email. And so the staff can't have staff meetings anymore. They have to do an email that sends out the communication about what's going on and daily updates and changes to the schedule and all that sort of stuff. And one of the things she brought up is when there need to be big changes in how you're communicating, have some grace and take some extra responsibility as the person doing the communicating to make sure that that message is getting received. So don't just send the email and say you're expected to read the email, but make sure you're following up. Did folks get the email? You may need to follow up with a text message and say, hey, check your email, make sure you got this, right? That especially when we're doing big transitions in communication, which are probably, we're going to have to do some this year, however that may look at your camp, that we need to check in with our staff and make sure that the message is getting received. All right, we're going to take a quick pause and we'll continue on with some of our best tips and tricks for training after a gap in operation after this quick message. Beth, do you know why January is actually the most wonderful time of the year?
Because it's not 2020 anymore?
That's fair. And because it is the launch of a new semester of masterclasses with GoCampPro.
No way.
Yes way! GoCampPro masterclasses are more than your average webinar. Most courses are 4 weeks, meeting once per week for an education session with an industry expert. Not only that, in between live calls, participants complete their masterwork, which tend to be made up of accountables for getting the work done to make camp programming happen, however that may look for you.
I do love checking things off the to-do list.
I know you do. And I also know that you love community. Built into every masterclass is the opportunity to meet a cohort of other camp pros from across the world who are camp mavericks working to offer intentional and impactful programming at their camps.
It's one of my favorite things about going to conferences. Whenever we get to do that in person again, meeting up with participants from our previous masterclasses.
Me too. I love it so much. Listeners, we can't wait to meet you. Check out the current masterclasses that are enrolling now at gocamp.pro/masterclasses and save your spot today. And we're back. All right, friends. So we're discussing what special considerations we need to do this summer after we've had a gap in operation. Beth, what other ideas do you have to share with our listeners?
I think it's going to be really important to allow them time during training to talk, to share, to get their feelings out about all that has happened in our world in the last 1 to 2 years since they were last at camp. So creating this type of space for brave conversations is something camps can offer that few other places can. After you've had a few days of training and you're feeling like you're a strong community, or starting to become one, I would run a session allowing staff the opportunity to talk about what they feel people in general and camper aged people more specifically have experienced and may be struggling with these days. Putting them into small groups, maybe according to their age, so that they're with their peers, would be a good way to encourage discussion. So give them some leading questions, ask them to come up with their answers, and ask them to record them so that you can then all participate in a wide group debrief. Now send them back into their small groups and ask them to come up with all the ways that they can help campers deal with some of these feelings and issues. And maybe you want them to use the needs and wants list idea that you used to create staff training. What you want them to do is to get really specific. So questions like, what areas of camp or activities that we offer may cause some new anxieties in campers in this new world? How can we make kids feel more comfortable, more at ease, considering everything they've been through? Are there new traditions that we need to create to recognize what we've lived through or missed last summer when we couldn't be together? How can we help campers feel comfortable with PPE or new protocols or changes to the way we used to do things? Having that opportunity to think about all of this and give their input will create more buy-in with your staff, and it allows them to feel like they're doing important work. They'll come up with amazing ideas, as we know, creative ways to share information with campers and families, and they'll be much more willing to go along with the changes if they've been part of that decision-making process. So let's talk about the elephant in the room this training season. Let's share our concerns, name our feelings, and come up with constructive ways to help our staff prepare for campers' arrivals and dealing with any issues that they may face that we didn't have to train them on pre-COVID-19. And share with your staff how the current crisis that we're living through could be a watershed moment for transforming the culture of your camp. So help them to see it as a very real opportunity to actively shape the new normal.
Awesome. Thanks, Beth. Gabs?
I love that. I'm like pausing, I'm thinking, I'm processing. It's so meta, it's so good. So for me, when we're talking about the gap year, we're talking about again, staff members missing experiences that they might have had the summer before to give them confidence in moving forward. So I'd like to talk about our junior counselors. So first year counselors coming into your organization, and that could be anybody, that could be new staff members as well. It could be your young staff members. What if you created a program where those staff members could coach or be a camp counselor to 2 or 3 campers online, where those campers are doing a program? That program could be a creative program. Let's just say you have some fun archives and they want to express themselves via your archives, where they can print up those archives and create a collage or a stop animation, or even write a song to those archives, an ode to your camp's history. Or maybe those campers are doing a project of beyond camp, beyond your camp. So how has camp impacted them in a positive way? How are they taking the lessons of camp outside of camp? And they get to do a little mini project, again, a creative project that they get to create themselves or with some other campers. So here's the tier system. The tiered system would be a simple project that campers can create. And then the next piece is that a new staff member or a young staff member supports that creation online. Here's the kicker. Your new supervisors or new support staff, they support those young staff members. They mentor them. They have a meeting beforehand and say, set up the goals. What are you going to do if it's an awkward, conversation online? How do you move that forward? What if the campers have way too big of an idea that is perhaps not possible? How do you gently guide them to something that is possible? And then they can, afterwards debrief with those mentors. So that perhaps young leadership team member has somebody that they can supervise and guide, and then those staff members get to create connections with campers that will be at camp this summer, so they already have that feeling of being a staff member, at least with 1 or 2 other campers. And if you're thinking, well, how do I organize this? How do we orchestrate this? It sounds like a lot of work. Don't worry about it. Your older leadership team members, they can be in charge and figuring all those pieces out. Now, maybe I'm creating a lot more work for you, and that's not my intention, but perhaps it's going to spark an idea in how you can start some of this learning before camp happens and provide those experiences. And as I like to say, confidence, because really it's the unknown that really creates a lot of anxiety in our staff members. And with COVID and the pandemic, there's so many unknowns. So by eliminating one of the unknowns and creating a positive experience where campers get to actually talk about camp in a way that they love camp, staff members can support them in that process, and young leadership team members can help support those staff members. We're creating less of an unknown, hopefully a little bit more connection. And at the same time, parents might see, wow, all the great work that you're doing. Last piece, if you did run an online program this summer, it would be very important to be transparent with parents that this is not that. There is a purpose behind it. So I would probably pick up the phone. I would call my 15 to 30 parents that I know love our organization, want to support this, and think that, oh my goodness, your camp is so innovative and has so many wonderful ideas that they want to be part of it. And then I would also advertise it outwardly, so that if there are some other campers that we didn't think of that might want to participate, that would like to join, then you could. So I would really contact those families, see if they're interested in doing such a program. So then that builds a little bit of confidence and gives an experience to your staff members.
Well, thank goodness you didn't run out of ideas.
Now we know the secret. She just asked her campers for the ideas. So.
I ask always other people. This is the common theme in all of our podcasts is get your leadership team members to come up with the things you don't know how to do.
Yeah, smart. Mm-hmm. What smart managers do. Well, I'm going to add to Gab's giving you more work, and I'm also going to give you more work, which is if you own a facility or even operate on a facility, maybe you don't even own it, to take some time now in the next month, if you can, and walk around that facility with your 2021 lenses on. In talking to Nadia, she was walking around a facility that had been shut down for 4 or 5 years. She said that there were things that she was like, yeah, that's totally the way I would have put those boats away or that gear away to be stored for 1 year. But when it was stored that way for 4 or 5 or 6, that problems started to happen. And so that may be the case for you. There may be things that you've put away the way you've always put it, but now that it's actually weathered almost 2 full years, you are going to need to build in some extra cleaning time going into your summer. Around here or around North Carolina, everything gets mildewy and moldy. Like it's just damp here all the time. So think about extra cleaning time, also with a new lens of what kind of and how much inventory you need to have. We used to use a lot of shared gear in some of our programs. And is it that you're buying extra cleaning supplies to clean that stuff and sanitize that stuff? Are you buying extra sets of gear so that you can rotate and kind of quarantine some gear while others are in use? Are you giving each camper their own packet of materials and supplies to work with? I think if you just pull out your old inventory lists and think you're going to use those like you have in the past, they're not going to be good enough. So spend a little time now looking through that. And this is another awesome time that you can bring in some return staff members or work with your leadership team and have folks all put some eyes on these lists, on inventory, on, how do we typically open camp? Take some other staff to walk around camp and say, let's brainstorm on what is camp going to look like here this summer. I had a conversation with a director recently who said that she was just having a hard time kind of getting excited about this summer. And I said, well, why don't you try to go take a walk around that facility and really try to picture what this summer will be like? Because she said, most of my summer is spent thinking about how we're going to do things differently and better next summer. And I didn't get to do that this year. And I was like, I totally resonate with that. That's how I spent my summer too. How can we optimize? How can we make things a little bit better? How would I do this differently? And we didn't get that opportunity. A lot of us didn't. So think about how you can go spend a little time out at the facility doing that walking around, doing that sooner rather than later. Think about how that impacts your training this year. All right, we're going to do one more pass around, see if anybody else has any other ideas. So Beth, anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yes, I think living through a global pandemic has been awful. And I think that there could be some real positive outcomes of the coronavirus crisis. The drive to do some digital learning has been around for quite some time now. And the current situation has accelerated this trend, and I don't think it should stop here. There's a real opportunity to rethink staff learning, how we learn, where we learn, when we learn, and together with whom we learn best. Virtual learning presents us a blank canvas to reimagine how to develop our people before they even get to camp. You may be required to do virtual training until all your people are vaccinated or until things are safe for people to gather again in larger groups. But I don't think virtual training should just be for this summer. I think it should become a staple of training moving forward. And I know lots of people have been doing it for a while, but many haven't. And I think that we can view the current online approach as a permanent way of delivering parts of training instead of just a temporary fix. Think of all the lessons that you could teach or the topics that you could cover before folks get to camp. But as you go ahead with planning training this year, I don't want us to forget all of the many lessons that we've learned in the past 9 months. So we've learned things like virtual training should always be direct and to the point to engage learners and keep their attention. We've learned that we need to incorporate more interaction, more question and answer sessions, more engaging visual aids, more videos, more polls, and more breakout sessions. And we've also learned to keep in mind that we need to provide regular breaks to process the information. These are great lessons for online training. And these are skills that we've honed in the last 9 months of digital communication that can be used to our advantage in in-person training as well. So don't just dismiss the virtual training opportunities and lessons when we can put COVID-19 behind us. Virtual trainings have reinforced the importance of effective communication with staff so that we all arrive in the same place with the same base of information. Understanding the importance of soft skills, or what folks are now calling power skills, which I love, by the way, going to use that new term, or at least it's new for me, and how we can use these to develop our staff for their summer responsibilities, but also their future careers. So there's been a real focus this year on things like empathy and collaboration and the interest in and focus on wellness. And finally, the importance of flexibility. So virtual learning and the fact that we had to learn to do it instantly back in March has also created opportunities that tested us, that encouraged us to design on the fly, to be agile in our thinking, to change course rapidly, and of course, to make mistakes and try again. And I see all of these as positives to take with us into the future. So let's also talk with our staff about what benefits have come from a year or more of the coronavirus, the many lockdowns, the inconveniences, the struggles, and then let's put them to use. So have a conversation with them about how they've grown, what they've overcome, what they've learned, and how you can incorporate all of that into your training and into your summer. So let's leave COVID-19 behind us, but not all that we've learned because of it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Anything to add?
As I've mentioned before, I was privileged enough to have a skeleton staff on camp this summer, and one of our focus was to move camp forward. So it was just, on our site, in our programs, and in professional development, we wanted to move our camp forward. But one of the things that we did keep every week was our reflection space that we do every day, every Sunday, where we have a theme and we reflect on a topic, and it's reflected through song and poetry and conversation. And one of our reflection pieces was, and this is completely guided by staff. I'm there to support them, but they come up with a theme, was the silver lining of the pandemic. And so they brought forward all of the things that, because of the pandemic, their lives are better. And it's not to dismiss all of the things that are obviously really horrible about living through a pandemic, but it was a reflection on their life right now, and it was a perspective on some of the things that they would like to continue to have post-pandemic. And it was really, really powerful. It was one of my favorite reflections that I've been to in my whole life, being at Waro. It was so wonderful, and it was so neat to hear the perspective of our staff members during these times, including spending time with their families, as a lot of them do live at home now because they can't afford, or they're not going off to school. They're staying at home, and what does that look like, et cetera, et cetera. And so with what Beth was talking about in the virtual learning, I would perhaps bring in some of the silver linings that have occurred for them, and what are some things that they've learned about themselves that they would like to continue at camp, if that's possible, or even do a silver linings piece near the end of your staff training and say, staff training was different this year, but what are some of the things that we have benefited from? What are some of the things that you personally benefited from? And what are some of the things that as a community that we have benefited from? So looking at the silver lining might also illuminate some of the things that you want to adjust in your organization. Again, you don't need to know all of it, and having perspective from other individuals might be helpful. So I would provide opportunities to explore what our silver linings are.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think how you both have said, simply holding more space. I think that's something that's going to be really, really critically important this summer. So I think about, if I were planning a training, the temptation is to jam pack it full. You can't do that this year. Like, people's capacity is going to be less, and maybe your staff are fine. I mean, we know that kids and young adults are more resilient than I am, but you need to give yourself that grace too. So building in that space, so smart. So thanks for bringing that up, y'all. This is something I know we've said. I'm going to reiterate it because I think it's important. the idea of really letting your staff know as you're talking to them about this summer, this is what we are expecting for this summer. These are the things we do know. These are the things we don't know. This is our plan, and plans can change. And if you're not okay with plans changing, this may not be the summer for you at camp. And if you're not okay with camp not looking like it has in the past, this may not be your summer to be at camp. We know that things are going to be different in some ways forever going forward, but this is going to be a summer where there's going to be some tricky times figuring that stuff out. And so if you're not excited about being in that whitewater boat and having some big waves splash on you and it be a little scary at times, that it's okay to say, let's wait another summer, or can we find another position that makes sense for you? Maybe that's help on some virtual programming. So if this summer is not a summer that you're feeling up for an adventure where you're in the tossy turny whitewater, this may not be the summer for you to work at camp. And maybe there's another role for those folks, but we just need to be very clear about letting folks know those expectations going into this summer. Any other thoughts from our hosts today?
No, I'm going to save my last piece for later.
Sounds like a plan. All right. Well, Gabs, it is the time. Will you recap for us, please?
Yes. And the theme is you don't know, we don't know, nobody knows what the summer's going to be. Yeah. So first things first is let's connect with our staff. This has so many purposes. One, by connecting with your staff, you're creating trust, you're also gathering information, and you're even informing them about the summer. So it is a 3-for-1 deal. We want to do that. And let's start with Beth. Gathering info. Ask your staff what they need/want. My goodness, so simple. What do you need? What do you think you want to be successful this summer? And you can have little groups, chats on Zoom, or you can create a survey, but get that information out to your staff, make sure they do respond, and have a couple of probing questions so that they think a little bit deeper about what the summer might be. And while you're at it, this summer during staff training, do the same thing, same formula, but asking staff members what they think campers might need/want to feel good, safe, happy, successful at camp this summer. And she has a whole bunch of great leading questions. You might want to rewind and hear those questions again. I certainly will be doing the same thing, but it is meta. And this is going to help inform your staff members on what we're expecting from them as well. Hello, that's genius. I also would like to talk about a couple of acronyms that just popped up during the show. So if you are thinking of what does my camp need, and I'm not quite sure, and you have access to your site and you can walk around to your site, why don't you SET? And that stands for site, equipment, and time. Once you evaluate your camp and look at the site itself, the equipment, and the time that's going to be needed in the new procedures that you might have to implement this summer, thinking of opening day, thinking of visitors day, thinking of arrival, departure, activities, programs, food, everything, site, equipment, time, evaluate that. And then while we're at it, you might want to also do some virtual learning. And that acronym we have is DIB. Are you ready? Be direct, interactive, and provide breaks. DIB. So that's from Beth. Virtual learning is one of the new frontiers. Again, we don't know what the summer is going to look like, so maybe we do a little virtual learning before camp, but also after camp. Maybe make this part of your camp experience, your staff experience. And listen, in 3 years, staff are going to say, we've always done it this way, even though the internet was only created within my timeline. Also, let's look at first and last. Let's check out what are some of the things that our staff were missing and how can we celebrate it? Can we provide them opportunities for control? Have the same session that happens, 3 times, and they get to choose which one and what focus to go on, and maybe create some best hits during staff training so that there's some familiarity as well. And just to add a little bit more work onto your plate, create maybe a tiered online program for your staff members to develop their confidence with leading campers, and then staff members supporting those staff members. Create a mini camp experience online so that people can gather some confidence. And just remember, this summer is going to be like eating burgers, off of a China plate. We don't know what to expect, but we're doing it together. And that's the message that we want to give our staff. We're here together to have some delicious burgers, and we're going to eat it, yes, off of grandma's China plates.
Yes, yes,
So awesome.
Yes, we are. I love it. That and pizza. That was the other meal we discussed. So, you know.
Have you eaten anything off the China plates yet? Or
no, not yet. We're planning.
Okay, let
Don't
us
worry.
know.
I will post on Instagram. Don't you?
Yes, please.
Well, if you'd like to get involved with the podcast, you can tell us your thoughts on this episode by using the hashtag #CampCode. You can also tell us what topics you'd like for us to discuss, any guests you recommend that we have on the show, any great leadership training tips you have to share. We'd love to hear from you. We are all about sharing in this industry. And if you found this podcast to be useful, please leave a rating and review us in your podcast app. Your feedback really helps keep the show going. And we love our reviewers so much that we share highlights here on the show, but we're still waiting on an influx of new reviews. So in this new year, so today we will go ahead and jump on to how you can contact us. So Beth, how can folks get in touch with you?
You can email me directly at beth@gocamp.pro. I'm on Twitter at Topaz and Instagram Topaz_Faye, F-A-E.
Gabrielle.
You can message me and find me on Instagram at Gabrielle Rail, Rail with 2 L's. And you can check out where I work at ouareau.com, OUAREAU.com. There's an email there, and that person will message me if you contact us. And her name's Alexandre, and she's amazing.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
And you can email me, ruby@rubyoutdoors.com. You can also find me on Instagram at rubyoutdoors and on Twitter at rubylyn. Beth, would you like to share what our next podcast is going to be?
I would be happy to. I'm a little worried about it because I'm uncertain if I'll have anything at all to say, but it is acronyms and mnemonics we love.
I got very inspired by Packer's Tool of the Week episode, and I was like, well, we could do like an acronyms we love. We could just do that every year. So anyway, I'm looking forward to it.
Folks should be prepared to pack a lunch or at least a really good snack while they listen to that particular episode.
And make sure they have a pause play button accessible, because jotting down those notes.
I'm already working on what acronym I can make snack into. All right. It's gonna be
Safety, approachability. There's so many.
Oh, friends. All right. Our final segment on each podcast is a best practice for leadership training, and we would love to hear some of your most memorable moments or most effective tips. You can tell us what they are using that hashtag #CampCode. This week's best practice comes from Beth.
We are in the midst of a mental health awakening. Attitudes toward mental health have transformed over the past 10 years, and even more so in 2020. COVID-19 was like a catalyst to the growing acceptance of mental health issues. Factors like loneliness or the uncertain future and worry for loved ones meant anxiety became more common and in some ways better understood. And this has led a lot of businesses across the world to take a more active role in staff well-being. Employee well-being is now seen not as just important for the sake of being important, but also as a strategic priority for a multitude of reasons. And the most important, of course, are an increase in productivity, a boost in innovation and creativity, building that positive brand to attract new staff members or new talent to your camp. And staff are less likely to burn out. So why wouldn't you want to take care of your staff? It's a situation in which everybody wins. And not only are staff happier, but camp is then better equipped to make positive differences in the lives of their people. So I strongly think that this coming year, we need to role model types of behaviors and actions that help build the resilience of our camps more than we ever have before. And camps have been pretty darn good at it so far. I think we just need to up our game a little bit more this year. So I've got 3 really quick ideas for you that really focus on connection and the support that we find through that as human beings. So number 1 is to start every single day of training with personal check-ins. So if you've got a large staff, break off into small groups and then change those groups up daily. But ask a different question every day and give each person an opportunity to answer that. So things like, how are you feeling being back at camp this summer? Or what has sustained you through this last year? And then continue these check-ins throughout the summer at every staff meeting that you have. Just, make the groups small enough, or pairs, whatever, so that you've got the time to do that. It'll show your people that their well-being is paramount for you, and it'll help to create really good habits for them to check in with one another and with their campers. Number 2 would be to encourage peer-based support. So facilitate groups that work in support of each other. So during training, create small groups based on maybe responsibilities through the summer, or based on ages, or a well-balanced group of personalities. And then offer them time each week to meet throughout the summer and help care for one another. I was reading the other day about a company that is having weekly Islands of Sanity interactive sessions for their community, where people can connect and help each other improve their coping skills. And I thought that was great, Islands of Sanity. But the concept is actually inspired by the American anthropologist Margaret Mead, who asked, are you willing to use whatever power and influence you have to create islands of sanity that evoke and rely on our best human qualities to create, produce, and persevere? And you could even have the groups focus on one of those qualities at a time. So maybe one particular week you ask them, what are you creating right now? What would you like to create? And give those small groups time to share that. Then later on, what have you produced? How's that going? Who's benefiting? And finally, how are you persevering? What obstacles are in your way? How can we help you? You can come up with whatever questions you like, but having that peer support. So number 1, individual check-ins. Number 2, peer support. And then finally, number 3, I would also strongly suggest sharing your own challenges, your own mistakes, your own learnings. This is a time to show our vulnerability, to be really present with the people that we lead. So take time each day of training, or even better yet, you could start now as you begin or continue to connect with your staff virtually before the summer, to share how you've handled this past year. What's been challenging for you? What's been downright difficult? How have you moved forward? How have you cared for yourself? What do you need right now to keep going? How can they be a support to you? Making these conversations normal, a part of what we do to care for each other. So 3 ways to connect your people that will help strengthen their resilience and help you lead with empathy and humanity in a year where I think we need it more than ever.
Thanks, Beth. Those are excellent. Camp Code is a part of the GoCampPro podcast network. Check out all our other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. Stay tuned for our next episode. And from all of us here at Camp Code, thanks for the listening, friends.